Hi, I'm Cece Strong, and this is Code 3 Conversations. A couple of housekeeping rules. First of all, some of you are off camera, and that's okay. I get it. I have been in law enforcement, so I know that it's some anonymity sometimes helps. It keeps you from the backlash, if you will. And we'll get into that as we go on and on with our conversations. But I have a couple housekeeping rules. Please be respectful. Please consider the fact that we all have differing opinions, but I want you to share from the heart. There are too many podium conversations where they say the buzzwords of wellness and we want reform in policing and they should have just complied and all the other things that are being said. But these Code 3 conversations are an open forum to allow better and straight talk conversations. So let's get into it, shall we? I have with me and joining me today a couple of people who I think will actually add quite a bit to the conversation. So I am welcoming in some people. Come on over into the room. Please come in, join us. And I know that a couple people would rather stay anonymous, and that's okay. I want to welcome you in and let you know that my team is actually on with me. So they'll be helping us from time to time. Welcome in Eric. I see Dr. Karen Hills-Pruden. And these are some amazing people that can actually lend quite a bit to this conversation. So how did this all get started? Code 3 Conversations is what we are talking about in order to make change within law enforcement. After 30 years in law enforcement and recently retired, I want better. Now I could ride off into the sunset, never look back. I'm fine. I have my retirement. But what am I leaving behind to follow? So we're going to jump right into it because we got a lot to cover. Recently, I posted this question, and I'm going to read it to you. Without solely immediately having negative judgment, which can be rightfully understood, what is something that could greatly improve the law enforcement profession? I posed that question and it blew up. I had people saying that we need more accountability, therapy covered by insurance, college degrees, being honest and being kind and learning the laws and constitutional policing for others. And it went on and on and on. I'm inclined to say that they have a valid point, a very valid point, and they have a reason that they feel the way that they do. So I want to get into the conversations because the ultimate goal is better in law enforcement. Now, let me let you know that I am kind of in that middle, even though I wore the uniform. I grew up in an area where people didn't like law enforcement. So I kind of have the best of both worlds and the worst of both. But mirror matching that and creating a bridge of conversation is the only way through, because we can only yell our side of the argument so long until we actually improve. So I want to welcome in. Hi, Eric. Hi, Dr. Karen Hills-Pruden. She's an amazing person and she lends greatness to any conversation. And obviously the last names look a little familiar with the guy in the blue shirt. He happens to be my husband. So I am happy to have him here in the conversation. And he has 32 years of excellent service over 4 different agencies. And that helps huge. So come on in the room because this is not stiff. This is us hanging out and actually talking and working through some of the comments that I received from people in social media. So welcome. And if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself, Mr. Eric Strong, and share something with us and tell us who you are and all that good stuff. This is a Code 3 conversation, not me just speaking.
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I am husband of our host, Miss Cece Strong. It's my title. I'm just the husband. But, you know, we both have a lot of experience in law enforcement, myself 32, her 30. We've worked a variety of assignments. I retired most recently as one of the chiefs at LA County Probation. Before that, I worked with LA County Sheriff's Department. I've covered the gamut of jails, courts, patrol, uh, specialized assignments, investigations, and before that with Compton Police Department with gangs and a SWAT team. Um, One of the things that I just want to say, kind of what you said there, CC, is that I've had these negative experiences with law enforcement in the past, both while being employed and prior to getting hired in a law enforcement. So, I think I bring a little bit of a perspective from both sides, and that's what we'll kind of get into and talk a bit about as the questions come up. I'm bringing that 360-degree perspective, as you can say, where I've literally, even most recently, been a victim and a suspect, if you really want to be uh, candid about it. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about it.
Let's talk about it. I love it. And Dr. Karen Hills Pruden, if you can, just let us know. I recently was able to share a stage with you, and I'll be all day telling them how great you are. So if you could let everybody know, come on in the room. We'd love to know you.
Absolutely. So I am a global leadership strategist, but I think my role that will lead more to this conversation is I am also a civil rights leader. I am a former president of a civil rights organization, the NAACP, for the largest city in the state of Virginia. And so that lens gives me the opportunity to speak on behalf of others. And so although my lens may not always be a personal lens, I have had to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of those who weren't able to get into the room to speak on behalf of themselves in regards to interactions with law enforcement. And so my empathy and sympathy and understanding of where they came from and how they felt has allowed me the opportunity to represent them and speak on their behalf in those rooms that they didn't quite feel like they could be heard in those particular environments. And so I have two very different lens. Personally, I'm, pro law enforcement all day and all night. Can't really account for any negative experiences that I've had with law enforcement because I've always interacted with them in some type of positive way. But look, I live in this world, I live in this nation. I'm not exempt from media and knowing what others have went through. And I'm also a big researcher. And so when situations happen that are unpleasant, that are unfortunate, I dive deep into the information that's available to the public to try to understand all sides of that situation. And so I have those two lenses that I can speak from for today.
I love it. Oh my gosh. And you know what? You keep surprising me, by the way, Dr. Karen, because you always come with something. I'm like, what has this woman not done in this lifetime? Like, where does she fit all of that into it? And I believe that you've written like 36, if I have the number correctly, books.
Yes, I'm 37, but
Oh,
37 books.
hey, bring it. That one other book. Come on. Come on now. Come on in the room with the Code3Conversations. So basically, when I posed that question that I read earlier, my TikTok blew up and people had things to say. But this is what I noticed. They didn't immediately go to everything we see in social media. All cops are bad. We pay your salaries. Um, you needed to comply. So that's why there was excessive force. And all of the negative things that are highlighted, you can imagine someone like me who comes from a perspective of growing up in an area where people didn't like law enforcement, not too much. Me being a woman, let's keep it real. And then me being in the uniform and then being a Black woman in uniform. I'm, confident enough to throw that out there and be realistic. Each one of those dynamics brings something different. So I want to chop up a very interesting comment that basically was stating about being a victim. And that victim at a call was very emotional. And it was assumed that the victim was actually the suspect. So, from that commenter's perspective, the law enforcement officers didn't have the patience to be objective, find out what was really going on, and then make their approach and how they would handle it. Now, there's two schools of thought, at least for me, and I'm going to ask Eric your opinion of this too. I was not there. So let me preface it with that. There is no way that I can know and say for certain that either side of that argument is correct. However, there is the school of thought that you need as much information as you can get before you move. And then there's the school of thought of safety. And if it's an emergent situation, you have less of that time to be as objective because you want to keep everyone safe. So let's talk about that. Victim assumed to be suspect. So what do you do with that?
Excuse me. Are you recording this?
Yes.
Okay, so people are going to be able to hear this later. So I want to make sure I come up with this really great answer, right? No, I'm kidding. Just because once I say it, I'll forget it again. I want to throw something else in there. You're absolutely right. The first thing I can say is I wasn't there. I didn't. But the second thing I want to talk about is expectation. You know, um, I don't know if the officers did anything wrong. I don't know if they were lacking empathy or lacking compassion for the victim. And one thing we don't know, and when people often, have experiences, they typically tell it from their perspective. And so we're not getting 100, how animated was this person? How many times did the officers, if they did, say, hey, I need you to calm down. I need you to stop screaming. You know what I mean? In other words, what was the level? Because here's what comes to mind when I'm thinking about the many, many calls that I've been on when you're dealing with an irate or a panicked or a traumatized victim. I've seen them all. What is the level of interference with us allowing to do our job? How much is your actions, behaviors, words, how much is it interfering with our safety? Right. So what I want to go back to is that word I said, expectation. Person asked this, I'm assuming maybe they have some experience with it. What were they expecting from the law enforcement officers? And I'll give you this analogy. If I tell you to come to my house tomorrow and you can be broke, destitute, have nothing, no place to stay, and nothing to eat, right? If I tell you to come to my house tomorrow and I'll give you $1,000, you show up the following day and I give you $500, what are you going to feel? You're going to feel disappointed. Why? Because I established an expectation for 1,000, right? If I just told you, hey, I know you're broke. I know you need a place to stay. I know you need some food. Come by tomorrow and I'll have some money for you. I didn't give you an expectation and you came by and I gave you $500, you'd be ecstatic. Oh my gosh, $500. What a fabulous donation. What a fabulous contribution. You know what I mean? So same dollar amount, but what was the expectation that I created? One is going to generate disappointment. One is going to generate, a high level of appreciation. And so, what a lot of people don't know, because law enforcement for the last 100 years has been a great job of keeping everything we do in here. You know what I mean? I can't tell you why we do stuff, how we do stuff, when we do stuff. What was this person's expectation? What did she expect them to do when they arrived, or he expect them to do when they arrived, and this person was the victim? You know what I mean? So, interference is a big thing. Have people played the victim before? Yes. One of the things I want to say where it's very, very dangerous, and I don't know if this was a victim of a burglary or robbery, you might have said it, but when it becomes a victim of domestic violence, oftentimes the victim wants the perpetrator to stop the violence. However, when we get there and we're mandated to put handcuffs on that person and take them away, oftentimes the victim then becomes another suspect because they're like, no, you can't take my spouse. I need them. I need them here to help with the kids. They got to go to work tomorrow. You know what I mean? I don't want you to take them. I just want you to stop the abuse. You know what I mean? And it's a triggering event. So oftentimes the victim does become a major part of the problem. And oftentimes I've seen it, personally, you've got to restrain the victim because they're trying to pull that person out of the custody of law enforcement. So there's a lot of various perspectives there.
And I've had that experience. It called to mind a call that we went to at a hotel, and we were on the second floor. And I remember my partners restrained the guy. I'm dealing with the woman, and she ran toward me. And I was standing just outside the hotel room. And I literally, my first instinct was to step out of the way. And I'm thinking, if she literally in that split second, if she goes over this rail, I'm going to try to catch her. I'm going with her. So luckily, my other partner was on the other side and we were able to actually just calm her down. But she did exactly what you're talking about. She was upset because he was potentially going to jail. Now, shifting that thinking so that I'm looking at from a different side of the paradigm, if I'm a victim and I'm high level emotion, and I just know a little snippet of this particular commenter who has been following my page. And I actually look at pages. I do a lot of, I'm like Dr. Pruden. I'm always looking and searching and watching what's going on in social media. This was something that was pretty horrendous. So I don't think that this person would have said, yeah, hey, time out. I need the person here in the home with me. And that's my opinion. Because again, these are code 3 conversations. And I keep saying that because these are the conversations that people are not having. They're not talking about things like this. They're just out there spouting out, this is either the rule or this is my emotion. So it's good to get these perspectives and feel free, jump in. And I want to take this time for just a second to thank my staff member. So Val is my assistant, and she's going to be working in the background for me and doing all that. So I got to make sure I say, thanks to my team who will jump on and actually support me. So I'm loving it. With that being said, I don't know, Dr. Hills, Pruden, I don't know if you have anything else, if you have something to lend to that particular thing. If you don't, you can always say, CC, stop calling on me because I don't have anything. Because this is as relaxed and straight up as it can get with Code 3 Conversations.
No, I think I can add something to the conversation. It is certainly in line with what has already been said. What I like to add is that we all bring our own personal biases to the job and situations and our personal experiences. And so, not knowing what those biases and experiences are with the officer or the victim, and these decisions have to be made in a split second, in a very quick turnaround time. It is hard to place yourself in one's shoes. I know myself, if I interact with law enforcement, even if I am the person who placed the call, if they walk upon me and don't know who placed the call, I act, if they say hands up, I put my hands up or whatever till they can establish who is who. But that has more to do probably with my not necessarily training, but having to coach others on how to try to not escalate a situation, but de-escalate a situation. And so if they're trying to ascertain who is who, some people may get offended if they tell you put your hands up and you're the one who called them. But why not just put your hands up until they can ascertain, who they're dealing with, what the roles are, so that they can quickly assist. Reminding the general public, as a community leader, that we're talking about split second decisions that people have to make. And not all actors are good actors, and so and they have to make the decision very quickly, what is going to put me in the safest space, as an officer, as well as the person that they come who placed the call. And so as someone who advocates for the general public, a lot on my side is educating why sometimes you may have to do those things that you may not feel like you should have to do because you placed the call, but it helps de-escalate the situation so that the officers will know who the actors are so that they can move quickly towards that individual that they should be asking questions of. And so that's what I would add to the situation. But we all have biases, and given what we've went through before, whether we've been attacked, not listened to, or whatever, that plays a role in that split-second decision on how we react to one another in those situations.
Okay,
Just like that. I think that's
I'm going back to patrol. I'm sorry, Eric, and we're gonna suit up Dr. Hills Pruden, and she's gonna be a partner with me because she just explained that beautifully. I love it, and I'm sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
No, I was going to say that she brings up some very, very valid points that are so, sometimes as an officer, and I want to say this, there's men and women officers out there, you know what I mean? And we don't know what they saw in their childhood growing up. We don't know what they're experiencing in their home, just maybe even the night before, the weekend before. So you're very, very just so on point with the experiences and the biases. But one of the things I also want to remind people as part of the education component, you mentioned it, is that oftentimes, let's just take a domestic violence incident, right? There's typically two people, maybe there's kids, maybe the kids are teenagers, maybe they're adults in the house, maybe there's other family members. And a lot of times you only have two officers responding. And sure, they're going to ask for a backup, they're going to ask for additional people. But imagine you're in a highly emotional, as you said, split second position that you have to make a decision. And now it's two of you, but you're dealing with 2, 3, 4, 5 people, right? So that adds to it as well. When we walk into a situation, we're looking at like how many people are here, right? How many of us are here? Where's our backup? So all of these things come into play with the way they react, with the way they respond, with the way they communicate, and sometimes you really have to escalate. And when I say escalate, I'm talking about the volume, your command presence to everybody there, because if they're yelling over you, you got to get them to calm down sometimes. And so that's just another point, just the education component, just for people to understand that, it's also part of it is numbers. Numbers adds to the safety.
Absolutely. And there's so many moving parts. I saw it was on the news, and they had a couple of people put in situations to have to draw their weapon. And the responses were all over the place. And one of the actual newscasters who was involved in this, he said after the fact, he was like, "Oh, I couldn't do this job." He was like, "There's no way. I was about to shoot everybody that was out there in the parking lot because I didn't even know which direction to turn in." And training, yes, but we are still human beings underneath that uniform. I think I've just always tried to live in that space, looking at it as best I could, shy of emergent situations, but trying to look at it also. And maybe it's because I grew up in that area where people were like, and I'm going to just shout it out, straight out of Compton, because now people putting straight out of everything on t-shirts. So before it was something bad, now it's like, yay, something to be celebrated. But coming from that space, I think I had a different perspective. I would look at the fact that this could be my mother, this could be my family member. Like, how would I want them treated? And then there's a certain point where you back off. You've got the cuffs on them already. They're in the back seat or whatever. But we get to see the negative press. We get to see when they're still continuing on. I've seen some videos that turned my stomach. It literally turned my stomach to see someone beaten while handcuffed, choked while handcuffed. There's no space for it. I'm just being honest. There's no excuse and no way that we should have things like that happening. With that, we have a very generalized topic of empathy. And some people confuse empathy, apathy, and sympathy. Because I, for a long time, was like, okay, they all sound the same. But just for generalizing, and you all can correct me if I don't have it right, I sympathize with you. I feel sorry. I really can. Oh my gosh, I did not like that happening, that happened to you. I empathize, I can actually kind of put myself in that position, or I've had a similar experience. So I can empathize because I know a little bit about what you're dealing with, or I've experienced similar. And then lastly, apathy. Get over it. It is not that bad. Your limbs are hanging off. They'll be able to reattach it once we get to the hospital. And I know that's an exaggerated, but that dismissive, like I don't care, is where I think we start to turn into what the public don't. They're expecting a little more. And I'm leaning in that direction because I know we also want empathy while in your uniform. I want someone to understand it. I want to go home to my husband. I want to go home to my kids. I want to be safe as well. So meeting in the middle with that, what are your thoughts on the whole we need more empathy in uniform?
Who first?
I want to,
Just
you
jump on
mentioned it
in there.
earlier. You mentioned it earlier in representing others, so you
Yeah.
might be good for you.
Yeah. So I will, I don't think I've ever had apathy. Now that I think about it, I don't think I've ever had that. I'm glad. But I definitely employ a lot of sympathy and empathy. I don't think, as one who picked a profession where I represent others, I mean, my profession has been human resources. So I represent
Mm.
leadership as well as employees in a lot of sometimes contentious situations at the table. I had to have a degree of empathy and sympathy for both sides to understand exactly where they're coming from. Being a community leader, a lot of very unfortunate things happen to the public, and you have to really be able to put yourself, even if you haven't personally dealt with that particular situation, in order for you to adequately advocate for them, you really have to be able to empathize what they were feeling, during that moment, what they've experienced up until that point based on the information that you have. I think using those two emotions, it helps us to kind of somewhat navigate, but it's never foolproof because again, we still have life experiences and biases that play a role in how we empathize and how we sympathize. I mean, it's still you can't understand something that you can't even conceptualize. How do
Absolutely.
because you can't conceptualize it to the magnitude that it needs to be to fully understand what someone else have experienced. And so the degree to which you may empathize or even sympathize may be a lot smaller or less stringent than what that moment called for because you haven't personally been through that situation. And so, although I felt both emotions, I do believe that, you can never take that individualism out. And that is the fuel for all those other emotions, sympathy and empathy, and how we interpret them in any given situation. And so, yeah, I've never felt apathy, but empathy and sympathy, I don't think you can navigate in this world without utilizing them. It's interesting. You can have parents who can sympathize and empathize with their children, but they can't with adults in trying situations. So it's
Mm.
not that they aren't capable, it is based on the demographics that they're interacting with at that moment. For some reason, they can't connect the dots to put themselves one in either that person's shoes to understand how they felt, or they've never had a situation where they even come close to that they can kind of account to their own experiences. And so I believe that we all are capable of doing it. It's just with different demographics and different groups of people, it comes out more so than others.
Differently. I like that. And when you say it,
So,
you have the capacity to do it, but sometimes connecting the dots and it's not across the board for others. And I just want to pause here for just a second before Eric, you jump in. and let the attendees know. Thank you for joining us for Code3 Conversations. These are the raw kind of talks that people are not having. It's not the podium talk and the things that sound good to the ear of those listening. We had a question posed on social media. I put it out: without solely immediately having negative judgments, which can be rightfully understood, what is something that could greatly improve, excuse me, the law enforcement profession? And the chat blew up. So we were speaking about victims being assumed to be suspects. And then right now we're on the topic of empathy. What I found is that the people commenting didn't immediately pick a side. It was kind of a neutral and suggestions. And I don't usually see that. A lot of times it's we hate the police and they're beating people, and then you get the we pay your salary. So that's just bringing those of you who have joined us as attendees, bringing you up to where we are now, where we're talking about empathy and then apathy and sympathy. So go ahead, Eric. I'm sorry.
I think that's a very tough thing. There's so many variables. There's so many things that contribute to that. And Karen was talking about, if you can't put yourself in a person's shoes, and I just want to talk from the Southern California aspect, and this even goes back to the recruiting that law enforcement does. You know, they recruit into certain areas and demographics, and they're looking for this ideal candidate on paper. And so if you're familiar with Southern California, I'm just going to say they get these candidates that are great on paper candidates out of Orange County. You know what I mean? Let's just say Orange County, California. Not that Orange County's bad, not that people there are bad, but then they take these people from Orange County, which is, you know, a high middle class area, most of it is, and then they have to go and police and patrol and provide services in a lower economic area, and a place where nobody looks like them. They're not engaging with people where they can look at them and say, hey, this could be my uncle, this could be my brother, this could be my nephew. So it's very hard for them to have empathy. And that's where that bias, I believe, you know, that you're speaking about comes in, that bias and those personal experiences. But I'm going to throw another thing at it. And whether you can empathize with the person or not, whether you can understand their position, their shoes, whether you could put yourself, I'm sorry, in their shoes and understand what they're going through, law enforcement has to operate with basic human decency, with common courtesy, the common consideration that you would give to anybody.
Absolutely.
They have to operate with a level of professionalism and respect. And it doesn't matter who you are, what you did, what situation we're in right now. I have to operate with professionalism and respect. And here's where I think it really becomes, it really will change the way that we do things if you know, as they say, treat people how you want to be treated. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? You know, how would you, whoever that is that you're dealing with, if it's an elderly gentleman, an elderly man, and you could see that person as your father, your uncle, your grandfather, what it is, you have to ask yourself, how would I want my dad, my uncle, my grandfather treated? If it's a young man, a teenager, you have to ask yourself, how would I want my younger brother, my son, my nephew treated in this situation? And that's where it really goes, you know, to just human decency.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and I really think that empathy is important. I don't know if it's absolutely needed. I don't know if I need to understand that you're robbing people because you don't work or you don't have a job, or maybe you just choose to do that because you don't want to work. I don't know. I don't know if I need to understand your motives, but but I don't need to be the prosecutor and the judge and the executioner right there on the street. I need to do my part, my job, And that is, I see a crime, I stop a crime, I see a victim, I help the victim, I see a suspect, whatever that situation is. Sometimes it's an arrest, sometimes it's a citation, sometimes it's a warning. Um, I think what we suffer from in law enforcement is an authoritarian complex. We have the authority to do things, and there's a big difference between what we have to do, what we need to do, and what we can do. And a lot of times, honestly, I'm going to go back because I'm saying a lot of times like it's all the times. There are so many outstanding, good officers out there, men and women that are doing the job the way they're supposed to do every day. What we see in the media, you know what I mean, and on social media is always the negative stuff, and it makes us all look bad. So my point is that what we see puts a very bad taste in the mouth of people when we see these interactions with these officers that feel like they're the authority, and they just don't simply know how to back down. They don't know how to de-escalate. That's my point. I mean, I think I'm getting a little off topic there, off the empathy. Empathy is very important. I agree, but I think just that human decency and respect and professionalism uh, can offset that, even if you don't have it.
And leading with that is what and again, I keep emphasizing those split second situations because there's not a lot that you can do with that. It can be really high level. And like the first question, when they were talking about the victim being assumed to be the suspect, you now put yourself on the other side of that, and you're in the uniform and you're rolling up to that. And you're walking into a home where are you the only two people here? And then next thing you know, someone's walking out of the back room, and they're coming from behind you because you're standing there talking to someone. And I don't know if we do enough to look at it 360 degrees from the perspective of the officer, from the perspective of the child that's sitting there watching it, from the perspective of the husband and wife. And I'm just specifically thinking about a domestic violence situation because we were talking about that earlier. But I don't know if we do enough to try to or if we have the time, depending on what's going on. I mean, you think about an argument you have with someone. I don't think people argue and go, oh, let me step outside myself and I'm going to make sure that I'm one on the other side of that argument. And like, they must be thinking this. If that was the case, we wouldn't argue because we'd always consider the other side. So trying to look at the whole picture and get an objective view is something that honestly, I sometimes have seen, even in partners. It's like immediately, well, yeah, that person's, they live in this seedy neighborhood. Well, my parents were on 137th Street in Compton. I grew up there, and I'd like him to think I did pretty well and was always kind to people and doing my job well. I never had the thought that immediately, oh, you live in, let's just say Beverly Hills. Not that we patrol that area for the agency I work for, but, oh, well, that person must be someone who is thinking that they're an elevated mindset. You're a sir or ma'am, whether you're in the most affluent area or the lower social, economical, whatever we want to say. And if you approach your job like that, and, Eric, you say it best, make it across the board. If you're on a traffic stop, per se, if you're getting everybody out of the car, get them out in Beverly Hills. If you're putting everybody on the curb, put them on the curb in Beverly Hills or the other affluent areas of whatever it is. And making it kind of starting at a baseline of neutrality that everybody gets this, and they decide if it goes this way or that way. And I have a scale where I say you go 0 to 10. See, if I start off at 0, and let's say Karen's yelling at me and I'm at her house and I'm in her living room and I'm just like, if you don't stop screaming at me, open your mouth one more time, I'm going to draw my gun. And she doesn't say a word. She just goes, realistically, I just lost all credibility if I don't draw my gun. Because what did I tell her? Cause and effect. If you open your mouth again, I'm going to draw my weapon on you. I'm going to, hopefully I wouldn't tell her I would shoot her. I'm going to spray you with OC spray. But people don't realize that going immediately to the most aggressive force is the craziest way to put your job at risk. And that's speaking from a force instructor trained and certified, someone who actually studied that craft. And I know there's an escalation process. So not just on the equipment we carry, it's how we communicate with people. You're a ma'am and sir to me until you give me a reason to believe that you're not, is basically what that means to me. With the empathy thing, I think you guys brought that way, 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 way full circle. I love it. And from the perspective of the two of you, this is awesome. So here's a sticky one. Okay, so this is really interesting. And thank you also for the other people joining in. And as you're listening, thank you so much. And hopefully we can convince you to actually join in the parties on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month. So thank you for being here. But college degrees. Someone said that officers need to have college degrees. So I'm going to kick this one off. And I'm going to admit that although I now have a master's degree, and I can be proud of that, summa cum laude, I'm going to throw that in there too, because I'm a smart kid. I'm that nerd. But although I have a master's degree now, when I came on the department, I didn't. I had a high school diploma when I entered in the mid-90s into the profession. It was not a college degree. And I'm sorry, me personally, my experience, I've ran across some very educated on paper people who didn't use and default to common sense, common decency, the humanity piece. They just led with what they feel. That's not to even get into I'm leading with politics. And I'm going to treat people a certain way that I think that they vote, or I think that they're poor, so I'm going to treat them this way. That's too much to think about. We don't have laws and certain policies for one person and then a different. The laws are very clear. And if you lead with, okay, I assume this person is this particular side of the aisle, as people are always barking about all over social media, if that's what we're leading with, we've already lost. Why am I here? What is the purpose? And if college degrees are you can look at it in two ways. And I always say in Code3Conversations, we're looking at both sides of it. It could be a good thing because now the person has more knowledge. But how do we also shore up their education and their awareness? Awareness of what's needed for us to make change. Because I don't know about you guys, but in the 30 years that I did in law enforcement, the same excuses, problems, gripes, it's going in a loop. And nothing's really massively changing. We're still complaining about the same things I was hearing when I was a young deputy. I'm just keeping it real. So I will, whichever one of you want to jump in, if you have nothing on it, we're good. We're just going to keep rolling because I have a list of things that people gave me as things and ways to improve. And I applaud and want to thank those that commented on that post. I want to take the time to thank you because you are being part of the solution. We can talk all day about our opinions of what we think should be, but what are the things that people really feel would help the situation? So with that being said, what do you think? A college degree.
So I'll speak as the daughter of a 36-year career educator who is pro education, as someone who currently works in higher education, and someone who is highly educated all the way up to a doctorate degree and still have additional. For law enforcement, first of all, it depends on what your degree is in, if it's going to be beneficial to your job, because you can have a degree in dance, and I don't know how that would serve you if you were a beat cop. Just being real about it. But what do we learn if we are going to, I'll call it organized education, where not online education, because it's a different experience than going to a campus dealing with diverse populations, and the diversity has to do with, socioeconomic, cultural, race, gender, age, everything, preferably if you're going to a campus that has all of that. Sometimes our campuses are a little bit more one way than another. But when we go to college, we get the interaction with people who may be different from us, who may have been experienced life different in terms of how they grew up. They see things differently. And so if we interact with those individuals on a regular basis, then we learn how to hopefully healthily disagree, in a healthy way, have conversation and dialogue about things that we don't necessarily agree with. And then also for college education, it teaches us how to research, look into how to put theory into practice and find out whether or not does the theory work in reality, because we've all learned something in a classroom and know that it doesn't work in reality. And so when I think about what you learn through formal education, I think it can be beneficial for anyone who deals with the general public, because the public is multi-generational, multicultural, there's diversity in the public. And if you have had the benefit of higher education in that type of environment, I think it's beneficial. But I do think that your discipline plays a big role in it. I'm also one who is very mindful that in this era of where you can also be successful without a college degree. And so entrepreneurship, you can be just as successful as an entrepreneur, sometimes quicker than for someone who has a standard college degree. And actually, a lot of people are promoting entrepreneurship now. What I've seen, because keeping in mind human resources is my area of expertise, so I'm in the department that brings people into corporations. What I've seen is that for those who sometimes lack any type of organized education or experience or training, that they don't do well in the workplace where they have a lot of diversity and differing opinions, because they haven't had that training on how to deal with that, how to disagree, how to have a conversation, and for it not to go from 0 to 100, because they just haven't had that, which they may possibly get in some type of organized education. And so I do believe that there's benefits in dealing with a diverse population, which law enforcement does deal with, because you don't know what side of town or who or what that you may get a call on. And you still need to have sympathy and empathy and understanding and communicate, know how to de-escalate and all of that stuff. And preferably you want to get some practice prior to becoming an officer for that. And so where would you get that? You possibly can get that through education.
I love it, because you touched on the experience piece, the education piece, the kind of the well-rounded, because I would always, and I'm gonna go there for a second, as a woman in uniform, my voice is not heard as readily so. And even in certain discussions, I'm like, wait a minute, I served in the military. I've been in law enforcement too. And I probably have more experience or knowledge than everybody in this room, but it's going to take on a different dynamic depending on who it is coming from. And sometimes having that additional edge of the education, well, that takes that out of the equation. You can't blame me for that. Well, I served in the military. You can't blame me for that. What is left? And so also taking the experience piece and what you've been exposed to, because you're correct. If you've only been exposed to one particular group of people, that's what you're used to. And then you're introduced into something that you may have heard negative about all your growing up. You've may have heard, and it's been implanted in you that those type of people have this type of mannerism. But think about it. I'm in that uniform. So I can't tell you how many locker room conversations where I'm like, wait a minute, time out. You're talking about that area. My parents live there. You're talking about how seedy it is and how shady it is, but all of the areas there are not. It's what you've been exposed to, or heaven forbid, what you've heard and never experienced. So I like that you brought the experience piece into that full circle. And Eric, I know you have something on this topic. I can see it in your face, like, yeah, put me in, coach. So I'm going to toss it to you.
I agree with both of you in so many ways, but I am just going to say this. I don't know that having a degree makes you a better peace officer. I
Mm.
really don't. And I'll tell you why. That diversity piece that you're talking about and that ability to engage, with diverse populations, honestly, it depends on what school you go to. If you're at Harvard or Yale, how diverse is it? You know
Good
what I mean?
point.
Even my, our daughter went to LSU in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and they're less than she, as a Black woman, is less than probably 5% of the population. So,
Mm.
and I'm talking about just Blacks. I mean, so yes, you may deal with other demographics, you may deal with other races, but it really depends on where you go to school. Um, the military can give you that same exposure. I mean, people come into the
Mm.
military from all walks of life, from all over the country, and from other countries as well. And so I think that can give you that same exposure. I too joined law enforcement without a degree. I too now have my master's degree with distinction. Thank you, Ms. Kuma Cum Laude. But that was a later education, and I want to go back to this. It goes back to what I was saying earlier, as far as that perfect candidate. What
Mm.
does that look like? I know that maybe going through college can give you a little bit more life experience, as opposed to
Mm.
hiring a 20, 21-year-old. Maybe you're getting, so what are you doing in that in between time? But I go back to the traditional schooling. We have things like COVID that have happened. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Our children were in traditional school and then they had to come home from college. You know what I mean? So, and the question is, can they continue with that online? I agree that exposure, that ability to, have those debates and to hear other perspectives in the classroom is very important. But what if people don't have that opportunity? What if they started a family young, or what if they're just helping take care of their parents? You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And so they have to deal with an online. And I want to give you a little bit of hope I don't take too long, but I want to give you this little bit of scenario of something that, I experienced when we were dealing with, when I was in the audits and accountability.
Time's up.
We were doing, hush, we were doing a performance review.
And
Uh,
he says, hush, right here on the show. I love it. Yeah, but
we
that's
were
what I
doing a
want.
performance
I want
review
that comfort.
on
Go ahead.
background investigations. And so I give you two candidates, right? And before I give you that, let me preface with this. When you were in law enforcement, you're not going to the birthday parties. That is not the crux of your job. You may go to them, you
Mm.
may go and do some community affairs, but you're not going to the wedding and the reception because you're there to show a sign of support from law enforcement. You go to the reception when a fight breaks out. You go to the birthday when, somebody pulls out a gun and there's a
Hmm.
shooting. Even the happy events. We go to the graduations. I just saw one, a high school graduation, where a big brawl broke out and
Yes.
shooting happened. That's when we're not there to celebrate. We're there to keep the peace. So you're dealing with people in adverse situations for probably 70% of your job, right? You're dealing with, so I want to go to this. Two candidates. One, I mentioned Orange County, grew up in Orange County, upper middle class. Both parents are working, 16, 17 years old. His parents give him a car, right? They
Mm.
put his name on a credit card so he can start building his credit. He does everything he's supposed to do. He goes to high school, goes to college, has some jobs here and there. I don't really like it. I quit, right? Goes and gets another job, and his parents are telling him, hey, you got to work. You know what I mean? You got to contribute. You got to have your own spending money. So if he decides to quit his job, right, and decides, well, I don't have money right now, mom. I can't pay my phone bill. I can't pay my credit card bill. I can't pay my car note, right? What are they going to do? It's all
Mm.
attached to them. So they're going to catch it up because, number one, they don't want their credit to get messed up. They don't want his credit to get messed up. Bottom line, they go through school. You know what I mean? They get their college degree. They've pretty much stayed out of trouble. They go apply for a police department, a candidate. That's the one we want. Everything on paper looks great. Now let's take candidate number two, right? Grew up in a single parent home, right? A parent that is lower socioeconomic class.
Mm.
They go to high school, they stay out of trouble, they do all the things that they're supposed to do, and they get out, and now they're going to a community college, right? And they're trying to get their classes in, but they're working too. So now parent gets hurt. Parent gets hurt, and when this parent is hurt, it's not like I got a bunch of sick time or disability. I mean, and I'm just saying, this parent may be a food vendor. This parent may be a house cleaner. They may be doing something. When they get hurt, they don't go to work. They don't make income. They don't have money coming in. So now this student who has bought their own car with an extremely high interest rate, by the way, right? Because they didn't have any credit, who's paying for their own classes in school, is now helping their parent by getting a second job. They've already been helping their parent, but now they're getting a second job. And so now what's starting to fail? The classes, right? I can't put the studies and the time, and I'm running late. And sometimes these community colleges treat you like you're in high school. They're taking attendance. It doesn't matter how much you studied and great. Look, you weren't here in class yesterday, so I'm docking you. Well, like, wait a minute. So now this comes the situation where they're working two jobs and going to school, and now their little sister prom comes up. What are they going to do? They want their little sister to enjoy prom, right? So they're going to take some money that the mom can't help out with now, and they're going to help her buy a dress, get her shoes, do whatever. And maybe the car note's going to be late a couple of months, right? Maybe they got to withdraw from a class or drop a class because now it's becoming overwhelming. It's too much. Now maybe their grades, and if their grades were B's and A's, now maybe they're C's. All of that is going to go on paper, and it's going to go to a law enforcement agency. And guess what that law enforcement, well, look at their grades. Well, they dropped classes. Or look at their credit. But if you ask me, who's the one that's more responsible? Who's the one that's dealt with more adversity and shown more perseverance and fortitude in life? If you ask me all day long, it's candidate B. I want candidate B out there responding to these calls for service. Candidate A has had everything handed to him. You know what I mean? So, because here's what law enforcement requires: good judgment, good decision making, reasoning, as you say, these quick on the spot decisions, right? So I don't think that a formal education gives you that. I think life education gives you that. And the other component too is, what just about the people that can't afford to go to college? What if they don't have the parents that can, get them into college, like I said, and, and they're struggling, and maybe they're on the 6-year plan or the 7-year plan or the 8-year plan because they're working, going to school. Now you're in your mid-20s, maybe you have a relationship, and you're piecing together units from community college and this kind of stuff. I just think that, and this is the last thing I'll say, up until a few years ago, and that's the last time I checked, law enforcement nationwide was still 70% male white.
Yeah.
Think about that. In 2022, 23, whenever, 70% male white nationwide. What does that mean? That means that 30% is not Black, 30% is not Latino, 30% is everybody else, including women, right? So if we try to put these kind of stipulations on a hiring, we're going to decrease the pool that's already depleted and already intentionally not pulled from. Why is it 70% male white? Because that's what they want. That's who they're hiring. And I'm telling you this firsthand after having reviewed, having done an audit or performance reviews on the hiring background process. It is different for minorities than it is for the male white. It really is. They look for ways to disqualify them as opposed to looking for ways to bring them on. We talk about law enforcement's having a hard time recruiting. Are they? Are you having a hard time recruiting that one demographic that you really want? Because there's a lot of other opportunities and options out there. So I do agree, and I do believe that formal education is so very important. I promote it. I push for it. Like I said, I have my graduate degree, so I do believe it, but I don't know if it's what's needed and it's what's really going to make you a good officer. And I think if we impose that, if we put that in as a hiring requirement, we're just going to continue to reduce those numbers of the people that can go and patrol the neighborhoods and the areas that they grew up in, that can patrol and provide service to those demographics that they come from, where they can have that empathy, where they can have that connection, where they can look at people and say, you could be my uncle, my father, my grandfather, my niece, my sister. And, you know, I think that's really, so it's a big, it's not just as simple as, for me anyway, it's not just as simple as education expands your mind. It absolutely does. But there's just so much more, I think, that we need to consider before we try to, you know, tie the hands of law enforcement and make it so that, you know, we can't hire people unless they have a degree. So,
and so I felt that pain. I felt the pain too, Eric, when Dr. Karen told us we should have been educated a long time ago. Wait until we old. And
that's what I got from it. I got from it that she was saying, you know,
he said y'all needed to be educated before you walked in there. But some of the points that you brought up, it's very interesting to me that being a child of two people that came from the South, both grew up in Birmingham, Alabama, they didn't see more of the opportunities, if you will, that I see. And that sometimes people will make that an ungrateful, like you should be grateful that you have these experiences that you have. Here's the way that I see your 70% to your 30%, since you brought that up. If I grew up straight out of, remember I told you it's on the t-shirt, everybody love it now because they're straight out of this, that, or the other. If I, which I did, grow up in Compton, and my parents came here and bought a home during the mid-50s. If I started out and they were coming from being poor to actually the best that they could do was buy that little house that I grew up in and teach me some values. And I started off here. And one of your other 70% candidates was here. How in the world are we in the same place? Wouldn't it be or stand to reason that they should now be even higher? How was I able, against the odds, to challenge that narrative? And not just challenge it, I'm not bragging, but I did the job with heart. I did the job well. I did it with considering other people. I had the empathy because I grew up with some of the same challenges that people were having. I had the wherewithal to take a step back and objectively look at everything. And part of me wants to sarcastically say, hey, 70%, you fix it. There's not enough of the 30%, whatever I fit into that small little percentage. And I'm just going to put it out there. The percentage of people that are of my race was reduced drastically beginning in 2018, late 2018 and forward. And we had a sheriff that basically, yes, by data, the number of people from a certain dynamic were a larger number within the area. So if you were looking at data, you could say, well, yeah, it's all matching. But then look at the number of people that look like me that are being incarcerated. It goes back to when Eric was saying some of the penalties don't fit necessarily the crimes the same way. Just like you're taking people out, putting them on the curb in the lower socioeconomical areas compared to the more affluent. It's at some point, all of it starts to need to balance out with some straight reality. I would love to take a poll of the people who had the opportunity to work with me and say, what did you get from me? Same person from that same area that everybody thinks that it was like, so much worse comes from that area. What is your opinion of me before you knew where I worked? And let me digress a little bit for a minute. Where I grew up became part of the case that was placed on me falsely. They didn't have anything with my work. And I'm in that 30%. And Eric, you gave us that. That's why I'm harping on that. I'm in that, started off with a little less than this over here. I think I had my hands this way, so let's stay consistent. But I started off with a little bit less, and I'm rising and being there with you. And then guess what? It happened. Instead of saying, wow, Cece, you did your job well. You know what? I dealt with quite a bit well before the crash, and we'll get into the crash on one of the later sessions that we have. But I never had anyone really acknowledge that. They loved it when I was calling cadence. My uniform was sharp. I was probably about 40 pounds smaller than I am now. But I was sharp in my uniform. I was sharp in the way I did my job. I backed my partners. I checked every single one of those boxes. But in all honesty, Code3Conversations, let's keep it real. It was never quite enough. I always had to do a little bit more, work a little bit harder, and push that much more. And I go back to sarcasm. I'm saying the 70%, like, okay, you have the majority of that. What if we just said, hey, it's for you to fix? Because we're on that hamster wheel, we're still having the same conversations and not necessarily openly.
Let me just jump in real quick, see, because something just came to me, because oftentimes we'll talk about it's never enough. And we have to work a little bit harder. Guess you know what? Everything that you are and everything that you represented, your sharpness in your uniform, the way you treated people, that's the way we're supposed to do the job.
Mm.
So maybe it's not that we have to do more. Maybe it's just that other people don't have to do as much. You know what I mean?
Wow.
If
Wow. Wait a minute. I got to let that hang there for a minute. Wait a minute. You have to repeat that so that it hit my ear the same way it did on here, this side over here. Say that
it's
again
not it,
and say it slow for us in the back of the room that don't know any better. Bring us to the
maybe
front.
it's not that we have to do more. It's just that others don't have to do as much. Because
Wow.
when you think about it, you wear a uniform.
Mm.
There is no policy. Show me one place anywhere in the world, much less the country, where they say, be as sloppy and as messy as you can in your uniform. When
Amen.
do we put on a uniform? I've seen plumbers look better in their uniforms than some of the people that I've worked with. You
Mm.
know, you have to do the job a little bit better. You have to, you know what I mean? And I really think that maybe we've been looking at it wrong. I mean, because everything we're doing is what we should be doing. We're
Mm-hmm.
meeting the standard and going above it. I think others just don't have to do as much.
Wow, that's a whole bar. That I don't even know how to come back from that because it's oh, you dropped the mic.
I
Okay.
dropped the mic. No.
I'm gonna drop it too. I don't know why, but I'm gonna drop one too. But Dr. Karen, you can drop a mic if you want to.
I'll
Um,
drop it.
then you're dropping it. It because and I have to say thank you. And those who are watching this, or you'll see the video later, these are the conversations that we want to have with Code3Conversations always. And the people that I'm speaking to, they bring this kind of flavor. The perspective is not swayed in one direction or another because, of course, we all have our biases. We know if you have not visited the Museum of Tolerance ever in Los Angeles, for those of you who have, you know, they say, okay, everybody go to the door where it says prejudice or non-prejudice. And what does everybody do? They sashay over to the non-prejudice door and it's locked because there is nothing that exists that is non-prejudice. It's like you better go on over there to the other door because that's the only way we're going to continue the tour. It is that and realizing those implicit biases that maybe people, and I hear this said a lot, well, maybe they're not aware. Maybe they don't know. And y'all got to bring me along a little bit with that because I am of a different mindset that people know what they're doing most days. Now, there is some room for some folks that just don't understand. I get it. But sometimes people were either steeped in, I don't like nothing unless it looks like me, or them folks from that area, there's something wrong with the whole group of them. Were steeped in it like tea bags and they cannot get out of it. But you got to get to a point where now you're an adult. I know, and I love my parents because they always told me we are perfectly imperfect. You're going to learn some stuff out there in the world and you could probably come back and teach us. And I was so happy that they taught me that way. I have a sore spot because of my own grandfather and my mother having experienced straight racism, like blatant. I lost my grandfather because of it. And yet I see all over social media people talking about how hey, that was so long ago, you need to get over it and we need to move on. Well, let's move on with everything. Let's stop the disparaging treatment for some and not for all, or feeling like you have to actually go the extra distance. And like Eric said, sometimes we think we got to do extra while others may be just not doing enough. And nothing is an absolute. I don't believe any one race of people, any one height of people, any one size of people, any one of anything is 100%, but yet people believe that. And there is a large percentage of people out there. Unfortunately, some of them make their way into law enforcement. And when they do, that can be a huge problem, because I'm sorry, again, I'll go back to 3 decades and some of the same arguments are on the table. The same arguments. So we're going to get to comment number 4 before we actually wrap it up, because the time has flown by. But I'm going to throw this last one in there because it is so fitting in the last things we were just talking about. And this time I'm going to read straight from the comment. Training in de-escalation techniques and enforcement of using those techniques. In-depth programs to recognize their own biases and systemic racism. And I know that word sends people into a tizzy. Oh my God, everything comes back to race. But I will tell you, I cannot pull a race card from a deck that is not extended to me. That is my saying. Because if I am not being treated differently, I'm not going to have an argument. Show me that I was from Compton and mistreating people with disabilities, so it was said, and that I was attacking my staff and hostile, and all of it false, because there was nothing that you really get me on with my work. You had to dig deep. And what was the first thing you dig into? Where I grew up and me being a bully and the idea of the angry Black woman. I'll just say it because that's sometimes that's what people are expecting. If I'm not friendly and kiki and coo and laughing at everything, sometimes that's more of a, well, she's upset. What are you so mad about? Like, I'm not angry. I'm just sitting here trying to do my job. I'm not trying to laugh about every single thing. But certain words like biases and systemic racism send some people into a fit. So I want to know you guys' thought on that. I'll read it again because I said so much after. So let me read it again. Training in de-escalation techniques, which we do have at least a week-long course when I was last having knowledge of. And I sat in on it, and I'm going to be honest, there were some things we could have worked better on. And enforcement for using those techniques. In-depth programs to recognize their own biases and systemic racism. So your thoughts?
So the recognizing your own biases, that is a little tricky depending on the individual, because you have to get to a particular state to be able to recognize your own biases and how they have influenced and impact your behavior, your language, your actions, your reasoning, all of that. And that's very reflective. I don't think everybody gets to that point at the same time. So as we are interacting with one another, I may be very in tune with my own biases. As a matter of fact, very early in my career, I realized that I had a bias against women who didn't work. I'll tell you a quick story about it, but I was able to recognize my own bias. Okay. So as being a leader in corporate America, and one that was told to go get an education, get a good job, I didn't understand women who got educated and chose not to use their education, just sat home and didn't work. And it was like, well, why would she get a degree if she didn't want to work? What I learned about myself is it was a bias that I was unaware of, but I was able to see through just reflection. But I was much older. I think this was like in my 30s. I'm closer to 60 now. That for me growing up, all of the women that I saw work because they didn't have the luxury to sit at home based on the socioeconomic situation that we were in. So they didn't have the luxury to be a woman who sat at home. So my lens was that every able body needed to work. So adult Karen, when I heard that someone was just sitting at home, before I was very reflective on my environmental impact and situation and how it impacted how I viewed women who didn't work, I thought that women who didn't work were lazy. Because
Wow.
why would you
I
not
love
work?
the transparency.
Not realizing that the women who was in my environment, they didn't have a choice but to work, because if they didn't work, their children wouldn't eat and different things like that. And so, but this was Karen in her 30s that understood this. But all the way up to my 30s, I thought if you were a woman and you didn't work, you were lazy.
Wow. I love your
All behind
transparency. I love it.
environmental bias. Not everybody can get to that point where they can connect the dots. I talked about connecting the dots, life experiences and the ability to just probably be disgusted at myself. Like, why would you not, like, that's none of your business that lady don't work, and then just really digging deep into, why I feel the way I feel and trying to understand me. It allowed me to realize the cause and the impact of why I feel the way I feel. And I feel differently now. But all the way up to my 30s, I felt that way for someone who sat home. I think the same thing is applicable about other scenarios, that you have to reach a certain point through maturity, education, experience to even recognize something is guiding you in how you see something a certain way, and you not be satisfied with the way that you see it. One, because if you're satisfied with the way that you see it, then you're not going to want to change. You're not going to dig deep. Not everybody can do that. Some people go their whole lives and not realizing that the reason why they understand, dislike, or offended by certain things is connected to something environmental from their childhood or maybe an earlier adulthood. And so not everybody reached that. So think about us interacting with one another. I'm reflective after 30. I'm reflective about that situation after 30, but others never getting that way. And they think that women who don't work just lazy all the way until God takes them away from here. Same thing about race, income, materialism, who should hold a job.
Wow.
Some people never reach that point that they can be that reflective, so they can't prescribe themselves a change in behavior so that they will be differently going forward.
Okay, drop the mic on that one. Drop
absolutely.
the mic.
Let me ask you this though. And this is a real question. I mean, do people need to be able to reflect and understand and know their implicit biases? Or is it important? Let me just say this. Let's say that that's the gold standard, right? To recognize it. Because there is so much implicit bias training that goes on in law enforcement right now. Is it enough, maybe even barely, is it enough to train people and educate them that there are implicit biases, that they have them, and this is how you at least develop them, even if you can't recognize them and acknowledge them as your own? Does that make sense? It's almost like I'm educating you, like, there are these things in the world and we all have it. You may not know what yours are, but does that question make sense?
I understand. I think it is enough to lay the groundwork that they exist, even if they can't recognize it in themselves, because maybe later in life they will be able to tap into it. It's almost like that foundation of the church where people say, take your children to church to lay the foundation, and maybe they will reflect back and use what they learned in church, later in life. So I think if you educate them and expose them to the training, I do believe that it will be beneficial for some going forward to be able to be self-reflective. I don't think it's a full requirement for change. I think it's easier to change once you realize why you act, as opposed to someone else pointing it out to you. This is why you're acting the way you act. I think we can change quicker, better. It's more of an escalation of change because now I understand myself and I have a desire to change my behavior and my impact on others, or I don't like the response that I got based off of how I communicated, the tone I communicated, or whatever. And so I want to change that. And I think things happen quicker once we understand. But absolutely, training lays the foundation for the knowledge to change, whether you're ready today or in the future.
And it's interesting. I was reading the other day Forbes, and I may have this wrong, but they did a study and they said only 15% of the population is self-aware.
Oh, that's a small percentage.
That is scary on steroids. And when I was reading it, I was like, so what are the other 85% of folks doing? Are they just existing? Like, because I can zone out on social media and go down the rabbit hole, and I'm scrolling, but I'm still aware of my actions and how they impact other people. I remember, other than Eric, I remember a PTA meeting, and a lady stood up and they were talking about kind of bubble wrapping your kids from certain things about, adult behavior. We'll just call it that. And this mother stood up. I can let my kid watch whatever I want. This is my child. You can't tell me what to do with my time out. And I said, if you don't mind, can I add something to that? We live in a world where our actions have consequences, and we do impact other people. Mm-hmm. If you're letting your child see sexually explicit content, let's just say on television, they're going to come to school, and if they talk about it, and now my son or my daughter comes home and says, hey, Mom, what does this mean? I have two choices. I can ignore it and tell them you're a child, stay in a child's place, don't ask me questions about that kind of thing, or I can sit down and have a conversation and explain it. Either choice that I take, you have caused me to change my parenting game. Because I got to give them an answer or ignore them, one of the two. And now you have, without directly, but indirectly, entered into the homes of other people. If we had that mindset when we were stepping out to do anything, and we first led with humanity, which is what we started this conversation with, which was amazing. But if we led with that before all of the, oh, no, this is mine, and this is my kid, and I can say whatever I want, and my freedom of speech, and I can if we stopped, and I do this is just me, because I don't press for other people to do what I do. But in my mind, I pause, I pray, and then I proceed. I don't immediately react, because there are so many people out there in the world that have something to say about everything. And they've got an opinion about this, and you should do this. And those folks, and it keeps us in an argument constantly. And in law enforcement, it keeps an us versus them versus us. Why didn't he comply? Why didn't you I pay your salary, so I'm a taxpayer. You need to do what I say. The police are all crooked, but yet don't talk about all in one race. And it's nothing but a ping pong back and forth, and no one to say, quiet. Everybody just stop and consider that none of us ordered from a menu who we were born into. I don't remember, prior to being born, looking at a menu and saying I want it to be 5'4". Eric, don't say nothing. 5'4". And however amount of pounds. By the time I am, don't say nothing. I'm not going to say my age either. No, I don't care. I'm mid-50s. But I never remember selecting who I am. So why am I punished for who I am? I didn't get a choice in the matter, but I do have a choice with what I do with that. How do I impact the world? And my impact to the world started at 5 years old as a Girl Scout. I went all the way through high school in Girl Scouting. My daughter also did a lot with Girl Scouts. We've been a family of giving to other people. So I don't think it crosses even my kids' minds to, oh, I don't like them because they're this way, or I don't like this person. And we don't have those biases up front. The time is totally getting away from us.
Let me jump
With
in here real quick, because that was a
Okay, go
two-part
ahead.
question. That was a two-part question.
Okay,
And I'm just going to speak real quickly on de-escalation, because you talked about de-escalation and
got it.
accountability for it.
Yes,
And I
absolutely.
think when we talk about de-escalation, that in order for us to de-escalate, we have to be up here to come back down. And I want to throw something out there we could talk about another time, but I think the training needs to be non-escalation first.
Ooh, that's a bar too.
Non-escalation, so that we're not even getting to the point where we have to de-escalate. De-escalation training is very important. Non-escalation, I think, is something we can talk about another time. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. So this has been amazing. And I am thanking those who chose to be panelists. I am thanking the attendees that said, hey, I'm just wanting to listen in. I thank you so much. And please remember that on the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, we will be back here with more to talk about. We had a total of about 13 comments on this particular post, and we only got to 4. So that means we have so much more left to talk about. Each week, make sure you are looking for the posted question and then join in. Make a comment. We don't offend and we don't get hurt by it. Well, I do because I'm a little sensitive, but that's just me. But we welcome whatever it is that you have to lend to these Code 3 conversations. One thing we can say is that none of us are getting out of this life thing alive. So why not make it a good experience for as many people as we can and reach out and help as many as we can along the way? I am going to, and I have to say thank you, thank you, thank you to the amazing attendees, Miss Beth Mendoza. I so appreciate you being here and being on the panelist side. To my team, I love you all, those of you who are here and also watching. I also have to say, and Dr. Karen Hills Pruden, it goes without saying that you brought the amazing flavor to this conversation. And I have to say thank you for that. And if you would not mind, if you give us quickly, how do people reach out and get more of this that you were able to just drop a few little nuggets on us today? So please share.
Well, if I've said anything that prompt your interest in me, you certainly can find out a little about me if you go to my website, drkarenhillspruden.com. I am a leadership strategist. I'm a community leader. I'm a wife. I'm a mother. My husband's retired military. And so I just someone who wants to use all of my talents while I'm here on this earth. And so thank you for having me, and this has been a blast.
Awesome. And I know my staff is going to take note of your contact and how to get in touch with you. And you will see being tagged and in our other post. And Eric, your final words before we end the Code 3 conversations.
I think these conversations are good. I think, this is what's much needed, especially through with the community, to hear us having these conversations, as well as other law enforcement. So I always enjoy these kind of talks. I always believe, whenever I was asked to speak anywhere, the one thing I don't necessarily like doing is preaching to the choir. You know what I mean? I want to speak in those hostile, I want to have those robust conversations, because that's how we affect change. So
Amen.
thank you for having me. Not that I had a choice. I think I had to be here, but thank you for having. No, it was my pleasure, my honor, and I hope that somebody got something good out of it.
Awesome. And I am going to say again to my team, thank you so much for being here. And if you are interested in joining in, you can on the screen, or we know law enforcement, it can be even behind the scenes as an attendee. Please feel free to sign up for Code 3 Conversations, totally free. And the whole premise is to make change in law enforcement. So remember, the second and fourth Wednesday of every month, beginning at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, which is, I think, Dr. Hills is all the way on the other side of that. And it is probably 9 p.m. because Eastern, there is a 3-hour difference. So I thank you once again. Thank you so much for everyone who has attended. And we'll see you again on the next Code 3 Conversations. Thank you so much.